Today I find myself at one of the extremities of the Northern Line, High Barnet. High Barnet is quite a delightful station, nested on a hillside in the historic market town of Chipping Barnet. As underground stations go, it's spiritually about 1,000,000 miles from the likes of Bank and Waterloo. It has something of the feel of a country branch line, which, when it was built back in the 1870s, it was. So it may come as something of a surprise to learn that there have been many failed attempts to make something more of it. The story of High Barnet begins at a completely different station, New Barnet. This station is on the Great Northern Railway's main line out of King's Cross. It opened in 1850 and was originally just called Barnet. This despite the fact that it really isn't a very good station for Barnet itself. The deal was this. Barnet was an important town in the area. Chipping is an Old English prefix that denotes a market town. In fact, Barnet Fair is Cockney rhyming slang for hare. The town was also famous for the Battle of Barnet during the Wars of the Roses. The Great Northern Railway figured it would be a good idea to give it a station, but their real priority was getting as quickly as possible up to York. They weren't going to divert their line to serve Chipping Barnet, no matter how important it was locally, especially given how hilly the terrain was around here. The people of Barnet were not at all happy about this. At the time, Barnet and the surrounding villages were very agricultural. A railway would be a pretty useful thing. Actually, a pretty essential thing if the area wasn't to be left behind in this new industrial era. So, a group of local business interests met in 1860 in this pub in Highgate and formed a railway company of their own, the Edgware, Highgate and London Railway. This would run from Edgware and Barnet to somewhere on the Great Northern Railway's main line. The Great Northern suggested a station on Seven Sisters Road, which you would know as Finsbury Park. The Great Northern were kind of weird about the Barnet branch, because having basically bypassed the town, they now decided they wanted to build a branch of their own there. I guess the EHLR chaps convinced them it wasn't such a bad idea after all. Originally, this would have gone from Barnet Station, then they decided on a line from Potter's Bar. The matter went in front of Parliament, who declared that there could be only one, and that would be the EHLR line. Not that it mattered in the end. Building the EHLR was easier said than done. This area is known as the Northern Heights, a hilly and undulating landscape. Some serious civil engineering was required to get the line built, and the soil around here tends to be muddy and loose. Landslips held construction up time and time again, and eventually the EHLR approached the Great Northern about a merger. This was carried out in 1867 and ultimately worked out best for everyone. The Great Northern Railway even assigned a special class of powerful tank engine for hill climbing, but this wasn't a success. High Barnet Station opened in 1872, taking the name High Barnet to distinguish it from the Old Barnet Station. Ironically, the Old Barnet Station would be renamed New Barnet in 1884. Now, High Barnet was not intended to be the end of the line. You can see the buildings are off to the side to allow extension. Originally, the line would have gone on to Barnet Common, but that idea was abandoned fairly early on. High Barnet Station is built into the hillside. In fact, it has entrances on 2 levels. Perhaps its most distinctive feature is this long slope from the station up to the town, fitted with handrails for those treacherous frosty mornings. The branch was a success, by far the most successful of the so-called Northern Heights branches. The company described it as bracing Barnet and advertised it as a place to live that offered the pleasures of the country with the privileges of the town. Soon the agricultural traffic that had justified the line's existence was replaced with commuters. The station was outfitted with a bell that rang a minute before the train's departure to hurry city workers along. That bell is now preserved in Barnet Museum. But the 20th century brought competition. The underground, the trams and the buses all started carving great chunks out of the EHLR's passenger figures. In 1923, the Great Northern became part of the London and North Eastern Railway. This was a vast and fairly impoverished company that couldn't afford to make the improvements necessary to make the Northern Heights lines competitive. In June 1935, the New Works programme was announced. This was a modernisation scheme headed up by the 2-year-old London Passenger Transport Board. As part of this, the Northern Heights branches were to become part of the Northern Line. Well, I say the Northern Line. It wouldn't actually be called that until 1937. At the time, it was the Morden Edgware Line. The takeover would allow the lines to be electrified, and it would answer calls from local authorities to extend the tube into the suburbs. The idea of extending the High Barnet branch was dusted off, but again rejected. Much of the Northern Heights takeover didn't really happen. The Second World War interrupted, and other economic pressures resulted in other schemes taking priority. But the work on the High Barnet branch was actually completed, and the first tube trains ran into the station in 1940. The London and North Eastern Railway continued running passenger trains until 1941, when they were withdrawn. Goods services continued to use the station until 1962. Now, while the line was completed, the intended work on the station was not. There was to be some rebuilding. There would be an escalator up the hill, which of course didn't get built. In the 50s and 60s, even more radical changes were proposed. The station would have been covered over and become part of a vast redevelopment. One version would have seen a row of blocks of flats built on top. Another would have seen a huge office building, not unlike Croydon's Threepenny Bit, again surrounded by blocks. These schemes were abandoned, and thank goodness. Barnet is a charming town, and development on this scale would have utterly ruined it. The station has seen improvements. As of 2009, there's now step-free access, which has been done sympathetically to the original architecture. But as if to prove that you can't keep a bad idea down, in 2019 another redevelopment plan was announced. Transport for London proposed putting 7 blocks of flats on land around the station, taking over part of the car park. This was vigorously opposed by locals, and the plans were scaled back and eventually abandoned in 2021. High Barnet would not get any higher, but honestly, if they'd looked into history a bit, they'd see that developing High Barnet Station is always a bit of a battle. Well, I hope you enjoyed this embattled tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the great northern assistants to my troubled branch line. I would also like to thank the people at Barnet Museum for their help researching the history of this station, which answered a lot of questions I had. And I will see you all again very soon for another Tale from the Tube.